بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد فقال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا إليها وجعل بينكم مودة ورحمة إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون. There are some verses in Surah Rum, the 30th chapter of the Quran, starting from verse number 21. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in these verses all of the signs, the amazing signs of Allah, of the signs of creation. And He mentions Ash-Shams wal-Qamar, the sun and the moon. He mentions the creation of the day and the night. He mentions the creation of the heavens and the earth, the rain that falls from the sky that gives life to the earth. All signs that we know, we hear, we think about. But before all of these signs, He starts off with an amazing sign of the creation of Allah that we don't give much thought to. And that's why He says at the end of that verse, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. In this, there are signs for what? The ones who think, the ones who reflect. A beautiful verse. He starts off with this sign. What is this beautiful sign? He says, and from the signs of Allah is that He created from you, for you. He created for you, لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُم. He created for you, from you, spouses, wives. Why? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. So the sign He starts off with is that He created from us spouses, wives. The scholars say this means two things. Number one, that the woman was actually created from the man. Actually from the man, Allah created Adam, then from him created the woman. And the second thing is the spouses He chose for us from the same jins, from the same type, from the same creation, type of creation, not from the jinn, not from the hayawanat. It was from humankind. He created two types for them to be together. What is the purpose of this? Before we even think the purpose of spouses, the purpose of a relationship, reproduction, children, family, no. He says, the first thing He says, لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, so that you can achieve, you can gain through them, through your spouse, tranquility and peace. This is a beautiful way it's stated in the Quran. He doesn't say that when they get married, they live together and they achieve peace and tranquility through other things, through family, through wealth. No, He says through each other. Each other, the husband and the wife, are a source for the tranquility and peace of each other. How is this possible? Here comes the amazing sign. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ, and He has made between you mawaddah. Mawaddah in Arabic is a special, deep kind of love. Wa rahma, and mercy. So there are two things mentioned, love and mercy. Why is this such a beautiful sign? Before that, mawaddah here, Ibn Abbas says that this type of love means that you do everything you can to make your spouse feel good, to be happy. And Ar-Rahman is you do everything you can to avoid doing anything that causes them harm. So you give them all that is good, you protect them from all that is harmful. Al-Mawadda and Ar-Rahman. So what's the amazing sign in this? The amazing sign is that you think that two people who never knew each other before, they're not family, don't know each other, they have no relationship, they get married, and shortly after, this special type of love comes in to their hearts with each other. And this is something that is put in the hearts only by Allah. And that is where the amazing sign is, that He puts into the hearts of the spouses this beautiful mawaddah, this beautiful mercy that is not found in any other relationship in the world. Any relationship between yourself, your family, anybody else, what is between the husband and the wife is not found anywhere else. And that is why Ibn Ishaq, the great historian, he mentioned a narration after the battle of Uhud, the second battle in Islam. There was a woman by the name of Hamna bin Jahsh, the sister of Zainab bin Jahsh, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. And so after the battle, when the battle is finished, many of the Muslims are killed. And so she comes to the battlefield looking for her close ones who were participating in the battle. And as she comes, she is told, Ya Hamna, have patience. Why? Because your brother Abdullah has passed away, he has been killed in this battle. And she says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. She has patience. She says, indeed, we belong to Allah and to Him we will return. And then sometime later, it told Hamna again, they tell her, have patience because your uncle Hamza has passed away. And she repeats the same statement. She says to Allah, we belong to Him, we will return. And then they come and tell her for the third time, your husband, Mus'ab bin Umair, the great companion, your husband has passed away. And when she hears this, she starts to cry. She can't control it. She starts to weep. And the Prophet ﷺ sees and he replies in the narration, he says, indeed, that there is a special place in the heart of a woman for her husband. There is something special in the hearts of the husband for the wife. And this is the mawadda, the special kind of love that Allah has put in the hearts of the spouses. And that is why when the Prophet ﷺ was asked in public, one of the companions came to him and asked him, Ya Rasulullah, who is the most beloved person to you in the world? Out of everybody, your friends, your family, your companions, who is the most beloved person? He says, Aisha, that his wife. So we learn this important, this beautiful aspect, this beautiful concept of mawadda and rahmah has been created by Allah to put in the hearts of spouses. But this is only possible if each side or each spouse is doing what they are supposed to do in their relationship. Because it does not come magically. It does not come without anything. There has to be an effort and work put into it. And today when we talk about, spouses, husbands and wives, we say, what are the rights of the woman over the man? What are the rights of the man over the women? Everybody is concerned over their rights. Everybody is concerned over what the next person can give them. Everybody is concerned that the fault in the ummah is with my brother or my neighbor or that Muslim in the other country over there. But rarely today do we look and start with ourselves. And that's why rather than going over the rights, I want to spend a few minutes about the responsibilities of each spouse, what they are responsible for. Rather than thinking about your rights, think about your responsibilities. Because there's a beautiful saying by a scholar who says, there's a man and he's looking into a mirror and he sees some type of dirt in the mirror. So he tries to clean the dirt from the mirror. So he's cleaning the mirror, he cleans, and he sees that the dirt is not going away from the mirror. Until he realizes the dirt is not on the mirror, it is on his own face. So what needs to be cleansed is his own face. Before he looks at the mirror, look at your own face. This is a lesson for us first to look at ourselves before we demand rights from other people. And all of the responsibilities of the spouses, there's a beautiful verse in the Quran, in Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of women, in which Allah presents to us very beautifully the responsibilities of the spouses. This verse or this page in this chapter in the Quran today has been taken out of context. Today has been explained incorrectly. Today has been translated wrongly. Today has become politically incorrect. And the verse of this part, it starts out with Ar-Rijalu Qawwamuna ala nisa, that men are Qawwamun in Arabic over women. So what does this mean? Today when people translate and explain this, they say, for example, that men are superior to women. Today they say men have complete authority over women. That is what this verse means. It is not what it means. The word qawwamun in Arabic, translated here, it means that men are active maintainers of women. That all of their responsibilities go back to what? To actively maintaining women. To actively maintaining women. What does this maintenance consist of? What do the responsibilities consist of? The first one we know and we spend a lot of time and attention on it. That's the financial responsibilities. We know the man is financially responsible to take care of the wife and the family. We know this, we spend time over this. Just a small point here, that when we are taking care of our family responsibly, that from the responsibilities of the man is not to go too extreme in spending too much and not to be stingy either. to remember the middle, to remember the Prophet ﷺ said that anything a man spends on his family with the correct intention, on his wife or children, anything he spends, كَانَتْ لَهُ صَدَقَةً. It is a good deed for him, it is like a charity for him written on his behalf. And the best of the charity starts with what you spend on your family first. And we've gone over this. This is something we know today, that men have the responsibility of maintaining women financially. Another aspect is spiritually. As Allah says in the Quran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. O you who believe, save who? Yourself first, and then your families from an-nar, from the fire. Allah tells us first to be concerned about ourselves. If you want your wife, you want your children to be brought up in a good way with Islamic manners and responsibilities in religion, that first, ku anfusakum, take care of yourself first, be a good example first, and then right away after that, be an example for your family and order them and help them as well spiritually. So be an example yourself. And amongst the responsibilities of the man that he must fulfill for his family or his wife is one we don't think about too much, is the emotional maintenance of women. That is the emotional maintenance of women. In a hadith narration in Sahih Bukhari, the wife of the Prophet Aisha, she says that the Prophet of Allah, when he used to come home at night, what would he do? He would spend some time to pray. We know this. He would spend time and pray during the night to Allah, Qiyamul Layl. But the end of the narration, listen to what she says. She says when he had 30 or 40 verses left, he would stand up, he would finish his prayer. After he would finish his prayer, he would look for me to make sure I was still awake. Then he would come beside me, he would lie down, he would sit down beside me, and he would speak to me, he would talk to me, he would ask about me, he would see how I'm doing, if I need anything. So this is the emotional connection that the Prophet ﷺ had with all of his wives. One that we don't think about, the responsibility to maintain women emotionally as well, consistently, constantly. الرِّجَالُ قَوَّمُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. This is included in this verse as well. And when the Prophet ﷺ was first given, the first revelation came down when he's in the cave, and he is overwhelmed by the revelation. Jibreel comes to him in his form, and he sees the angel, he hears the Quran, he is shook. He is overwhelmed by the Quran, the revelation. He needs comfort, he needs support. He needs to rely on somebody emotionally. Who does he go to? He has his friends in Mecca. He has many friends. He has family. But out of all the people, who does he go back to for that emotional support, for that emotional connection? He goes back to his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha. And he finds that beautiful emotional connection and the support in his wife. Something that we have to look at ourselves today. Are we actively engaging in maintaining our wives, our spouses responsibly, emotionally, and the other way around as well? From amongst the responsibilities of men as well is one of companionship. To maintain women actively as companions. What does this mean? One day at the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, when the Muslims, once they migrated to Medina, they were going to Mecca, they wanted to make Umrah. They were prevented, they signed a treaty with the Meccans, the Kuffar in Mecca, that they would not go for Umrah this year, they would come back the next year. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he goes to the Sahaba and he tells them, this year we are not going for Umrah, rather we have to shave our heads and sacrifice our animals and leave our state of Ihram. And he tells them to do this, but they are so disappointed because they want to go for Umrah that year to Mecca. They do not follow him right away. They don't know what to do. So the Prophet ﷺ again is in need of advice, or he is in need of somebody, of emotional support, a companion or advice. And he goes back to his tent to his wife Salama, and he tells her what happens. She sees his state, he tells her what happens, and she gives him great advice. She tells him what? Go out Go out and do what you want them to do. Set an example for them. Go and shave your head, go and slaughter your animal, and they will follow you. And he follows her advice, he goes out, he does that, and the Sahaba right away, they follow him, and they do the same thing as well. He seeks the advice of his wife, Salama. Another beautiful narration in Sahih Bukhari. One day, one of the neighbors of the Prophet ﷺ, he was a Persian man, and he made a great dish to eat. It was soup, a type of soup. And at those times, they would take the soup with bread and have it as a meal. So he made an excellent dish, this kind of soup. So he comes to the Prophet ﷺ, he tells him, I want to invite you for this meal. And with the Prophet is his wife Aisha. And he tells the man, وَهَذِهِ لِعَائِشَةَ, and this is my wife Aisha. Is she invited as well? And the man says, La, no. And the Prophet ﷺ says, فَقَالَ لَا, he says, no, I'm not coming. She is my companion, she is my wife. If you don't invite her, I'm not coming. So the man goes away. فَعَادَ, the man comes back after some time, he invites him again. The Prophet ﷺ says the same thing again, and this is my wife Aisha. Is she invited as well? He says, no. The Prophet ﷺ says, La, no, I'm not coming. The man leaves. He comes back a third time. Finally he says, this is my wife Aisha. Is she invited as well? The man says yes. He understands he's not going to leave his wife. The Prophet of Allah, he didn't say, Khalas Aisha, I will go and I'll bring you back something good. He leaves. He says, no, it's either us together or I'm not coming. The third time he says yes. And so they go together for the meal. That he spent time as a companion with his wife. This is not from the things that are good or extra. These is from the responsibilities of the husband to maintain the woman in all of these ways. And one more way I want to bring up that we don't think about much, or we take this and we put it all on the spouse, on the wife. And that is the physical responsibilities. Ibn Abbas, he heard a verse in the Quran in the same page. It says, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, and that for the women they have similar rights like the men. You know what he said about this verse? Ibn Abbas was one of the greatest explainers of the Quran. The tafsir, a lot of it comes from Ibn Abbas. He says in Tafsir al-Tabari, he says this verse means, or this verse when I hear this, he says, I love, or I think it is my responsibility to beautify myself for my wife. That because I expect, or I would like her to be beautiful for me when we are at home, for her to beautify herself physically, that I also think it is my responsibility to start with myself and beautify myself first for my wife. But today we put this whole category on the wife. She must be beautiful for the husband, and we don't concern too much about the spouse, the husband himself. But Ibn Abbas says it starts with the man to beautify himself for his wife, and then for him as well. Some of the responsibilities. And then in the same verse, Allah continues, in the same page, He says, another very interesting verse, He says, وَلِلْرِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. He says, and for the men over women, there is a daraja, a degree. That men have a degree over women. That men have something special, a degree over women. What does this mean? Again, we go to Ibn Abbas, and he explains it beautifully in Tafsir al-Tabari. Authentic narration, Shaykh Ahmed Shakir says is authentic. He says, Ibn Abbas says this verse that men have a degree over women. It says that men, they fulfill all of the responsibilities to the wives, to the women. Every single responsibility they had, they fulfill it. But they do not expect the same from their wives. They do not expect their wives to fulfill all of her responsibilities. They know there will be some shortcomings, and they have rahmah, they are lenient towards that, and they overlook those shortcomings, while still fulfilling every single one of their rights. And this is the degree that Allah says that men has over women. This is the tafsir of Ibn Abbas about this verse. And so we learn that the rights and responsibilities are not really connected. That don't think because your wife or your spouse is not giving you all of your rights that you can't fulfill your responsibilities. They are not even related. You have to fulfill your responsibilities regardless of whether you're getting your rights or not. And this is from the way of the Muslim. to look at himself, to do the best he can possibly do, and not expect others to always do the best as well. And whatever shortcomings they see, they forgive and they are lenient in this way. And then Allah continues and He talks about the women. He talks about the responsibilities of the women, summarized in just a beautiful statement. He says, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ لِلْغَيْبِ بِمَا حَفِظَ اللَّهِ. He says, as-salihat, that the righteous women are who? He describes them with two descriptions, two words. قَانِتَاتٌ حَافِظَاتٌ. The first is qanitat, the ones who obey. The scholars say in the tafsir, what does this mean, that the women who obey? First and foremost, they obey Allah in everything that they have to. That they fulfill their responsibilities towards Allah, and they obey what is commanded to them, and they obey whatever is made haram, they leave it away, and they obey. This first description has to do with the women, with Allah and the husbands in the presence of their husbands and their spouses. So they are obedient to Allah. And secondly, when their husbands advise them with something, command them with something that is good, whether to dress in a certain way which is good, whether to fulfill obligations, whatever it may be for Allah, for the household, that they also respect that, and they give the husband respect, a mutual respect, and they also obey that as well. And that is in the presence of the husband, that there is a respectful relationship, not one that is undermining, but is respectful in the presence of the husband. And the second descriptor is given in the absence of the husband. The ones who protect, the ones who preserve, the ones who safeguard. What? When the husbands are away. They safeguard, number one, his wealth. They safeguard his property. They safeguard his houses. They safeguard the family from any evil. And they also safeguard the honor and reputation of the husband, like the husband does for the wife. Recently, a Muslim woman, a Muslim sister, she told me something that really saddened me, but I'm afraid it's sad, but it is a reality. She says that when many times when there are dinners and gatherings, that friends and families, they get together, and she hears this because she's amongst the women. She says that Muslim women, they sit together and they talk. And she says, unfortunately, through years and years of listening and experience, unfortunately, most of the women, not all of them, but a grand majority or most of them, during those conversations, they speak negatively or they start complaining about their husbands. They expose the faults of their husbands. My husband is like this and doesn't do this and this and this. This by no means is allowed in this verse. The women and the men are the ones who preserve and protect their husbands and their wives they do not expose their faults, they cover up their faults. As Allah says in a beautiful verse in the Quran, هُنَّ لِبَاسٌ لَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ لِبَاسٌ لَهُنْ. He describes the spouses as a libas. He describes the spouses as a clothing, something that covers you. The scholars say that the spouses are described as something, as clothing that covers you. Why? Number one, because as your clothing, it covers your faults. It covers what embarrasses you the most. Nobody would like to expose their clothing and go out in the street. You're embarrassed of that. As your clothing covers up your faults and embarrassments, the spouses, the wife and the husband, they cover each other's faults and embarrassments up as well. They do not expose it to anybody. They cover each other up in that way. The ulama also say this verse also, as nothing comes in between you and your clothing, that it is very close to you. They say likewise, nothing comes in between a husband and a wife. That is how the relationship should be. The closest thing to your body physically is your clothing. The closest thing to you, the closest person to you should be your spouse, your husband or your wife. And lastly, just as you would feel incomplete without your clothing, that if you leave the house or walk out in public without clothing, you will feel something is missing. You will feel incomplete, just like you will feel incomplete that your spouse, your husband and your wife, they are what makes you complete as a person. They are what makes you complete as a Muslim. That's what Prophet said, that when a Muslim marries, half of their religion is complete. That it completes the person. And this is a brief summary of the responsibilities. And then the Prophet ﷺ ends, or a beautiful hadith in Tirmidhi, Shaykh al-Albani said is Hasan, a good hadith. He says, he describes the best of the believers. He describes the best of the Muslims. He says, O Muslims, وَخِيَارُكُمْ, and the best of you, خِيَارُكُمْ لِنِسَائِهِمْ, the best of you are the ones who are best to their women. And then he explains how. He says, خُلُقًا, in terms of their behavior, their manners, how they behave with women. Not in just in terms of maintaining them, giving them money, or financially. Everything, how they interact, how they behave, how they interact and communicate with them. The best of you in those behaviors are the best of Muslims. And this is something for us to remember when things are going good and when things are not going good. In terms of when you have arguments, when you have fights, that even then you are required, it is okay to argue. In fact, you will argue, you will fight. Even the house of the Prophet ﷺ, there were arguments. What is the evidence? In a beautiful hadith, this is a very long hadith in Sahih Muslim. When Umar ibn al-Khattab, he was asked about some of the wives arguing with the Prophet ﷺ. And Umar tells Ibn Abbas, in this hadith in Sahih Muslim, he tells Ibn Abbas, he says, one day I was speaking with my wife about something. And so she starts to argue with me. And I told her to stop. I said, you have no right to argue with me. And she says, Umar, you think I don't have a right to argue with me? What about the wives of the Prophet? They argue with him. Your own daughter Hafsa, who was married to the Prophet ﷺ, she says, she argues with the Prophet, so I have a greater right to argue with you. And he says, is this true? She says, go and ask her. Umar says, I grabbed my cloak right away, my clothes, my garment, and I went straight to Hafsa, his daughter, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ. And he goes to Hafsa, he says, is it true that you argue with the Prophet of Allah? And she says, by Allah, wallahi, that we do. And sometimes we stay 1 or 2 days, we don't speak with him, we are angry with him. Or he argues with us, he is angry with us as well. And he says to his daughter, fear Allah. This is not right for you to argue with the Prophet ﷺ. And then he goes to Salama, another relative of his, another wife of the Prophet ﷺ. He tells her, is this true? You argue with the Prophet ﷺ like this? She says, yes, it is true. We have these days, this happens. And then she tells him something. She tells him, Ya Umar, you love to interfere in everybody's business. And now you're starting to interfere between the wives of the Prophet ﷺ and the Prophet ﷺ himself. And Umar responds, look at the humility of Umar. Even now he knows, okay, he can't argue. He says that she influenced me so much, what she told me, that I lost all my anger and I went straight home. And then Umar continues in the narration. He says that sometime later, somebody comes to me with news. He says the Prophet ﷺ is angry with one, or has kind of like left or staying away from one of his wives or some of his wives. He's got into an argument. And so Umar goes to the house of the Prophet ﷺ, and he finds the Prophet of Allah has left his house, the main house, and he is staying in a place attached to his house. The narration says that you could approach it with a ladder. That you need to go up to a ladder and go to this part of his house. Notice something interesting here. Even when the Prophet of Allah had an argument with one of his wives, he never ever threw them out of the house or abused them physically or emotionally or made them leave. In fact, he himself took himself out and went somewhere else. The scholars say this is something for us to remember, that by no means should a woman ever be taken out of her house. This is a place where she is protected. This is a place where she has the love and respect of her husband. If you're angry with her as a husband, you leave the house, but you cannot make her leave the house. So the Prophet ﷺ goes to this place attached to his house. Umar goes to him and he tells him what Salama says. And what did the Prophet ﷺ say? فَتَبَسَّمَ رَسُولُ ﷺ. So he just smiled. He didn't say anything, he just smiles at what she says. And then Umar takes a second and he looks at the state of the Prophet. So he's moved away from his house, he's staying in this state, and he sees the Prophet of Allah. He says, he sees him lying down on a bed made of just palm leaves, and that's it. He sees him lying on a pillow made of palm fibers. And when the Prophet ﷺ gets up from his pillow, he sees the marks of those palm leaves on the face of the Prophet ﷺ. And Umar starts to cry. And the Prophet ﷺ says, فَمَا يُبْكِيكَ? Ya Umar, What has made you cry? Umar says, and that I see the state of the kings, Kisra or Qaisar, of the Romans and the Persians, the kings and the leaders, how they live in luxury, how they live in palaces with beds, the finest beds, the finest pillows. And I see you lying here with nothing, with really nothing, and I see these marks on your face, and this is why I started to cry. And the Prophet ﷺ ends his narration with a beautiful statement. He says, أَمَا تَرْضَى أَن تَكُونَ لَهُمُ الدُّنْيَا وَلَنَا الْآخِرَةِ. He says, Umar, won't you be pleased, won't you be satisfied that for them is this world, let them have it. Let them have this world, let them have the pleasures of this world, the comfort, let them have it for them. But for us will be the akhirah. That is where we will enjoy, that is where our comfort will come. And so Umar leaves, and that is the end of the narration. So even when the Prophet of Allah, the Shahid, the point is when he was arguing with his wives, he still had the best of manners, the best of treatment with him. In fact, in a narration when one day the Prophet comes to his house with a dish. He comes to his house, the house of Aisha, with a dish of food given to him by another one of his wives. So he brings that dish to the house of Aisha. And so the servant who is serving the food with the company, he brings the dish into the house. Aisha sees it, this is in Sahih Muslim, and she smacks the dish, it falls on the ground, and it shatters. So what does he do? How does he respond? Does he make her clean it up? Does he yell at her, shout at her? No. The narration says, first of all, he makes an excuse for her. He says, غَارَتْ أُمُّكُمْ, that your mother, the mother of the believers, Aisha, she has become a bit jealous. He makes an excuse for her. Then the narration continues, he goes down on his knees, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he picks up the food, he picks up the dish, he solves a problem in a positive way, he doesn't make it worse. He solves a problem in a positive way, and he orders for a new dish to be given and sent to the house of the wife who sent the dish, so that she has a dish as well, and she is not wrong, she has not taken something away from her as well. And even when Aisha was angry with the Prophet ﷺ, she used to say, the Prophet used to tell her, Ya Aisha, I know when you're angry with me. She says, how? He used to say, when you're angry with me, that you swear, you say by the Lord of Ibrahim. And when you're pleased with me, you say by the Lord of Muhammad. You take my name when you're pleased with me. When you're angry, you take the name of Ibrahim. And what does she respond? Even when she is angry, what does she respond? She says, Ajal, وَلَسْتُ أُهَاجِرُ إِلَّا اسْمَكَ. She says, Ya Prophet, O Prophet of Allah, yes, it is true. But even when I'm angry with you, I only leave your name from my tongue, but you're still with me in my heart. That yes, I don't mention your name, but you are still with me in my heart. And even when they were angry with each other, they had the best of manners in how they dealt with each other. I leave you with one narration and two beautiful sayings. Inshallah, 2 minutes. The last narration is how the Prophet of Allah was in his house. Generally, when Aisha was asked, they asked her, how was the Prophet ﷺ in his house? Like how was he? His behavior, what would he do in his house? And she gives him a beautiful answer. She says, كَانَ يَكُونُ فِي مِهْنَةِ أَوْ خِدْمَةِ أَهْلِهِ, that he used to be in his house at the service of his family. That he, the Prophet of Allah, he used to be in his house at the service of his family, not the opposite. The narration goes on, another one, that he used to, for example, clean up after himself. He used to sew his own clothes. He used to mend his own sandals. He used to take care of his own things, patch his own bucket. That he would serve his family in his house. And that is the best example of the Prophet ﷺ. We ask Allah to make us amongst those who follow the best example of the Prophet ﷺ and his family and his wives. Ameen. Lastly, I leave you with two sayings of the scholars, beautiful sayings. The second last one is a saying of Ibn Jawzi. He says that if you see any time something in your spouse that is not good, something that you dislike, that they are arguing with you, they did something wrong, whatever it may be, he says, before you look at them and their faults, he says, go and think about your actions and what you have done. Because it could be that what is happening with them, whether your wife or your children, it could be that this is a punishment from Allah because of your own sins. So before you go and blame others, review yourselves and reflect upon yourselves and correct yourselves first. And the last narration I leave you, the last saying I leave you with is a saying of Shaykh Al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah. A beautiful saying. He says, this saying, what I'm about to say, this principle should be known by every single man in this world. He says, treat your wives, treat your women how you would want your daughters to be treated. And he says that imagine you have a daughter, or you have a daughter who is married. Would you want her to be treated by her husband with harshness, with firmness, or you would want her to be treated from the best of ways, with rahmah, with love and mercy? He says, if you would want that for your daughter, then do not treat the daughter of somebody else except like that as well. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله.